All right, hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Right Brain Warm Up, the webcast that'll retrain your brain to be more creative in 30 minutes. In this episode, we are talking to three brilliant published authors whose work inspires people to engage with creativity beyond the page and into the real world. So we've got Jono Lineen. Jono is the author of a range of books, including River Trilogy, Into the Heart of the Himalayas and Perfect Motion. His PhD was on the relationship between walking and creativity, investigating the creative habits of Plato, Darwin, Goethe, and Steve Jobs. He's also curator at the National Museum of Australia. Thanks for joining us, Jono.
Great to be here.
And Darby Hudson is next. Darby is a poet whose work has been featured in Best Australian Poems, Meanders, doing some illustrations for, I've forgotten his name. Darby, what's his name?
Darby Hudson.
Yeah, no, the from the TV. What's his name? That you've been doing illustrations for Sean McAuliffe. Sorry about that. Also Cordite and many other publications. He wrote and illustrated a beautiful little book called Walk, and his debut anthology, Falling Upwards, is out now on Five Islands Press. Thanks for joining us, Darby. Sorry for muddling up your intro completely as well. And finally, we have Ali Berg. Ali is the co-author with Michelle Callis of The Book Ninja and While You Were Reading. Both novels have been sold around the world, and The Book Ninja has been optioned for a film. How awesome is that? Together, they founded Australian social initiative Books on the Rail, which encourages people to share their books on public transport. And she's also a freelance copywriter to keep the world going around in circles, which is great. So thanks for joining us, all of you. I might start with the first question, which I've been asking of everybody. I might start with you, Jono. What is creativity to you?
Wow, that's a big question. To me, in a way, creativity is everything. I mean, it's what we are as humans, as Homo sapiens, wise ones. My most recent book is called Perfect Motion, How Walking Makes Us Wiser, and that wisdom is actually based in creativity. And creativity for me is the basis of much of our evolution. I think of evolution having two aspects: a passive feature, which is natural selection, and natural selection doesn't designate or define problems. It uses kind of a shotgun approach to solutions. It throws all of these answers out there in the form of variation and of differential reproduction, and then sees what sticks. But then there's another more active aspect to evolution, and that's really based in problem solving. And the basis of problem solving, of course, is creativity. Creativity is what makes us great, and that greatness isn't just restricted to big C creatives, like Plato or Darwin or Madame Curie or Picasso. It's everyone. Everyone has this creativity, and when you find out ways to harness it and to use it in your everyday life, to become conscious of it, then your life becomes better, becomes more fulfilling and more interesting. So for me, creativity is the basis of who we are as human beings.
I think it does. It separates us from everything else on earth, isn't it? We have this push to always improve and do things better. We don't just settle at something and just leave it at that. Is that fair to say?
Oh, I think that's a really human trait. I describe Homo sapiens as bipedal problem solvers. That's what separates us from just about every other non-human species. We love a good problem. We take it on. Not many other species out there actually enjoy a problem the way that we do.
I love that. And Ali, what is creativity to you?
I agree, creativity is everything, but I think in a way creativity is courage or craziness, depending on how you look at it. So the courage to, I guess we all have, creativity in us, and it's the courage to really take that idea or that impulse or that gut instinct and pursue it and take it as far as you can.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because when you see kids playing around, they'll just try stuff all the time. But as you get older, you tend to go, oh, don't want to look bad or don't want to do the wrong thing. So you might lose a bit of that courage. Is that fair?
Definitely. I think that's why all kids are creative and all kids are so creative. And then the older you get, the more you're afraid or get nervous to try out different creative aspects or different creative things. But I think unleashing that creativity is the key to being creative.
Brilliant. And Darby, how about you? What's creativity to you?
Yeah, Ali, I totally agree with courage. I reckon, yeah, it's for me, I guess creativity is sort of like a passport to be able to connect with strangers and almost immediately on a very heart level. And I've met similar black sheep misfits. There's a whole lot of us. We're all out there. It's just a beautiful way to punch people in the heart and wake ourselves up as well. Sometimes I've felt like writing poetry is really just writing one long suicide note my entire life before dying of old age. It's like a love note to my 8-year-old self. But it's definitely a sort of a kind of a waking up and an unnumbingness of the autopilot that we need. We need autopilot just to get through life. But it's good to wake ourselves up every now and again.
Is that why you decided to write as well? So, we're all creative, but you decided to turn to poetry. What was it that made you to do that, I guess, to have that courage to do that?
I guess I love the thrill of saying what everyone's thinking, but no one's saying. And I think 90% of the time we can get that right, but 10% of the time we'll fall flat on our ass trying to do that. But we place so much weight on failure that most of us won't try doing that, which comes back to your point, Ali, about courage. I think it's kind of everything.
Yep. Yeah. And Ali, why did you decide to pick up the pen and get writing?
I think I wasn't really good at anything else besides writing, so there was that. I was always really bad at sport. I still am, but I remember people describing sport as being the amazing thrill or feeling of kicking a goal or winning a match or, I don't know, other sport terminology. And I guess, as corny as it sounds, that thrill for me was coming up with a book idea or writing a new character, or cracking that story arc. And I think that I guess writing is my thrill because I'm so bad at sport, and I think because it was such a thrill for me, I needed to do it in some way or another.
I found it interesting on this podcast interviewing people. A lot of creative people are just saying, "I was terrible at everything else," which I think is pretty great. It means you've got a calling when you know it's something that's deep in, it's part of your DNA almost to get it out there, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I had to do it because there was no other option.
And Jono, you led a very varied life when you were younger, and you've done a lot of trekking and all that sort of stuff. And then you got into writing off the back of that. Was that just something that developed through your walking and stuff?
Yeah, that probably was a catalyst. But I would say, like Ali, I didn't have any choice. I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I can remember sitting in the living room with my dad and my aunts and uncles and listening to stories while all of them were swilling some whiskey and being completely engrossed in those fictional and somewhat non-fictional worlds. And when I realized that story has the capacity to create environments that let you understand and mold the future, then it has all kinds of power. And that power, of course, is right there in the playground. When you're telling a fictional story to your mates, it's there at the footy ground when you imagine what your team could actually do in the final round. It's there when you're trekking in the Himalayas and you can imagine what it would be like to be at the end of a particular track. Stories are an alternate reality that give us vision. They give us the ability to predict and, like I said, mold the future. And when I realized, so I started out as a storyteller, an oral storyteller in the playground. and an oral storyteller within my family. And that morphed into writing really when I had a story that was so big that it didn't have anywhere else to go but to get out in the world to a larger audience. I mean, I think people who write stories as opposed to tell stories to their friend, I mean, they want an audience. You desire an audience, and when you desire an audience, it's because you believe that you have something to say. And I believe, the 20 years ago that I had something to say. And as Ali was saying, there's courage in that. It takes a lot of courage to write a story, to put a story out there to the public. I mean, you're laying yourself bare, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So I have a lineage, going back to my dad and to my grandmother and to my great-great-grandfather. So I didn't have any choice. I had to be a storyteller.
It's interesting what you're saying as well, like with being a storyteller, like to all of you, it's all about getting it to an audience and connecting with people. But the actual process of writing is very lonely. So how do you sort of balance those two things? I might start with you, Jono. How do you find that sort of dichotomy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I'm sure all four of us here have, started thinking about and scheming around a particular story that we thought was a brilliant idea. And you get partway into that and you're like, nobody's going to be interested in this. So, you've gone down a blind alley yet again. So I go back to the universals. I go back to when I'm in that writing phase, thinking about what people will be interested in relation to my life or my storytelling. What are the big challenges in this life that we have to overcome, that we have to integrate and learn from? And everybody has those challenges. It's death in the family. It's finding a partner. It's having children. It's parenting. It's professional challenges. It's all of that stuff. Creates the framework that you can work on as a solo individual. And I'm very fortunate by having a broad range of experience in my life that I can take a lot of those environments and then remold them into that universal narrative that I think maybe people could benefit from. So it's a constant balancing game, and let's face it, nobody really likes talking about their story until they think it's complete. And by the time you've completed it, it's maybe too late to correct it. So it's a really difficult one. It's about being a personal story creator and a public storyteller, and that balance is not easy to find. You're constantly
How about you, Darby? How do you find that loneliness in terms of, but then also trying to connect with people?
Yeah, I kind of feel like writing's a conversation with myself, and my best stuff is when I have no idea that I thought that, and it's like my ears hear what my mouth says, and I go, oh, I didn't know I knew that. It's like, or writing it down, I go, oh wow, where'd that come from? And then you follow it like a white rabbit. But that's only 2 or 5% of the time. And I think that's the gold stuff. But most of the time, I'm having a boring conversation with myself that I already know. But I love it when it sounds dissociative. But when you do, it totally is. It's like sometimes alcohol can induce that. But
going back to Jono in Ireland, everyone having telling stories after a few pints.
The stories got bigger.
Yeah.
But I guess so. I don't feel lonely when I'm writing fun stuff that I had no idea, but I can often feel lonely most of the time. But I love it when something connects, just random crazy shit connects with an audience, and go, oh, thank God! It's like they take the weight off your shoulders by you writing it, and you share the weight with a whole bunch of people, and you feel lighter. That's
oh, it's beautiful. And Ali, like, so your Books on the Rail project was literally taking books to the people and putting them on trains to sort of spread the magic of literature. How did you go about coming up with that idea? Because that's obviously very different to a lonely writing thing. You're obviously going to, let's get out to the people and get people back in with books. So how did you come up with that idea? It's so interesting.
Yeah, I guess it was sort of stemming back to that idea that we lost that camaraderie of people, of being on a train and seeing people reading the same book as you and having that sort of connection. Everyone was on their tablets, on their iPhones, on their iPads. And yeah, I actually was living in London and came up with the Books on the Rail idea. I saw my friend, my art director partner actually started Books on the Underground, which I worked on with her, and then thought it was a really Australian idea. So brought it back to Melbourne and just started putting my own books on public transport. And then from there, publishers got wind of it and started sending their books to us. And now there's thousands of books traveling on public transport. And yeah, finding that book, we often get emails saying that it made their day. And at the moment, because of COVID, there is no books traveling on public transport. But yeah,
well, they might be traveling on public transport, but no one's picking them up. They're just going around the loop.
Exactly. But yeah, I guess it is sort of, getting rid of that loneliness and forming that connection with the help of books.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So it's just interesting that you both, like all three of you, in fact. So Ali, you're talking about books and motion and getting around. Johnny, you've done a lot of stuff around walking. And Darby, you've done a book called Walk that was beautiful about the ruminations of walking. So why do you think you're both drawn towards, all three of you were drawn towards that sort of an idea? Maybe Jono?
Wow, okay, that's another big question. Walking and creativity, as I said earlier, I consider Homo sapiens, humans, all of us, to be bipedal problem solvers. Now, why do I say that? I say it because it's true. Our relationship between walking and creativity goes back 4 million years to that first ancestor who stood up on 2 legs to pick a piece of golden fruit and then staggered 3 or 4 steps on to take another. And what happened there was that person had been creative. They'd seen a piece of fruit too far up to actually grab, and they'd stood up and created a motion that actually liberated an entire strata of resources for those people. Now, in the process, what happened there was that by walking, we liberated our hands. And they weren't hands at that point, of course, they were forepaws. And over millions of years, those forepaws developed into these dexterous hands that we have now. And those hands became the mediums through which we could alter our immediate environment for our own benefit. We created stone tools. And stone tools are the first evidence of human creativity. If we hadn't stood up, we never would have started to create stone tools. And by creating stone tools for more and more specific purposes, we became more focused problem solvers. And that problem solving of course, it's culminated today, but it reached a bit of an apex about 2.5 million years ago when human beings got an appetite for protein. And protein, of course, the most concentrated forms of protein are animals. And so we developed these long-range hunting techniques. Now, long-range hunting techniques are really interesting because it involves a small group of people, males and females, and they track animals. You would track animals for days on end across the savannah and through the forest. Now, anybody who's been out for a long walk knows that after you've been walking for 45 minutes or an hour, some interesting stuff starts to happen. Your mind starts to drift. I'm sure Darby can talk about this too. You start to get these incredible thoughts happening. And there are biochemical and physiological reasons why that is happening. We are entering what's called flow state, which is transient hypofrontality. And this relates back to long-range hunting techniques. Because if you think about it, what these people did was they would track these animals for hours or days on end until they could get close enough to come in and actually spear the animal. They didn't have bows and arrows, they didn't have guns. They had to track them until the animals were exhausted. Our only physiological advantage over other animals is our endurance. It's our heat dissipation capabilities. We had to track animals until they collapsed. That could take tens or hundreds of kilometers. And in the process, you had to predict where that animal was going to be in 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes. So long-range hunting techniques involved really specific predictive thinking. It involved trying to understand this animal completely. Now, to understand an animal completely, the best way to do it is try and become the animal. And what happens when you enter a flow state, and all of us have been in a flow state? You lose your sense of time and you lose your sense of self. And that's what Darby was talking about how you get into that state where you start to follow these tracks. You start to follow these tracks in really interesting and new directions. That's because you've lost who you are. That's a really important part of creativity. It's an important part of problem solving. It gives you the ability to look at an issue in a completely new way. And again, that relates back to long-range hunting techniques, because to completely connect with the animals that they were pursuing, they had to get rid of their own personalities, their own selves. And so this idea of transient hyperfrontality actually has a relationship to our evolutionary progression. And our connection to that, our simplest connection to that, is walking. So if you just go for a walk, we all know after you've gone for a walk for 45 minutes or an hour, strange things, interesting, fascinating, magical things start to happen. And that's because we are losing our sense of self and opening ourselves up to new ways of viewing problems, of being creative. So, that's why I love walking. Walking instills in me trust in the process of creativity. I know that if I go for a walk, sparks will happen. Now, how those sparks all come back together to the original problem is a difficult issue, but you have to trust in the process. You've got to get out there and do it. And the work starts with walking and it finishes on the page.
I just want to go for a walk right now. You fired me up. Darby, is your brain exploding like mine is about what Jono's just saying? Was that why you got into doing your piece about walking as well?
I love just, what you said, Jono, about losing yourself. That's so important. It's so hard to do. It's like just shaking your shadow off, leaving it at home while you go for a walk. I just had a random thought on walking is, like, you can walk through a geographical terrain and you'll have a thought, and then you keep walking, and then you might come back to that same location a week, a year later, and you'll recall that thought that you had before. Like, you plant thoughts in locations. And so I love the idea of, like, I can become stagnant if I'm in the same place because I'm planting thoughts on top of thoughts on top of thoughts until I feel uninspired. I've been living in this flat for 5 years and I kind of feel like I need to get out of here. But so yeah, walking is almost like walking into new areas and literally new thought places to plant new thoughts. I kind of find that really, that's my little thought on walking and creativity.
No, I love it. It's so true. It's getting transported somewhere. John, are you about to say something?
Yeah, can I say something there? Because that's really interesting. Because what we're talking about there, Darby, is liminal space, right? And walking gives you this capability to enter liminal space internally and externally. You can walk into a new area, and in that new area, you encounter a completely different environment, and that sets you up to look at things in a different way. But walking also lets us enter this liminal space internally, psychologically, through the process of transient hyperfrontality. And this relates to pilgrimage, right? Why is pilgrimage a universal activity in almost all religions? It's because pilgrimage is taking someone out of their everyday comfort zone, placing them into somewhere entirely new, giving them a purpose, a physical and spiritual purpose at the end of it, and then saying, go forth and prosper. And through pilgrimage, you're constantly in that that liminal space. And in that space, again, you have to have trust and courage, right? And you have to have trust that you can reach your end point to the Santiago de Compostela or the Mecca or the Mount Kailash. And you also have trust in the people around you, people that you don't know, people that you don't have any experience with. And that combination of trust and courage opens you right up. It opens you right up to the experience around you. And that's why so many people talk about pilgrimage as being these pivotal, these defining moments of their lives, is because it's letting us enter liminal space over and over again.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm learning so much. This is so great. Ali, how are you feeling about that sort of thing? How do you start on the journey? I guess we're talking about all these journeys and pilgrimages. In a way, when you're writing a book, you're starting nowhere and you're ending up somewhere. How do you find that pilgrimage of writing?
Yeah, I definitely don't walk as long as Jono walks, as many kilometers, but the pilgrimage of writing I am familiar with. I guess I do it a little bit differently because I have a co-author, Mish Kalis, and before we even start writing one word, we get together and we plan exactly what's going to happen in the entire book. So we sit down for our first draft meeting is minimum 8 hours, and we'll start with avo toast and then get to wine later in the day, and we'll just
it's all about alcohol, isn't it? It seems.
Yeah, it's where the best ideas come from. But yeah, I guess we just sort of plan every single thing that happens in every single chapter and chat it through and talk it through, which I guess usually is quite a solitary thing, but you're sort of talking to yourself about it. But having a co-author, I'm talking with Mish, and we plan everything and write down this massive plot document before we start putting pen to paper. The reason we do that is because the way that we write is we split up our chapters. So I might be writing chapter 4 before chapter 3 is written. So I have to know exactly what's going to happen in each chapter before I start writing it. But that's my pilgrimage on my journey.
Oh, so I love how everyone's got a slightly different take on doing things. So we've gone for about half an hour. At this point of the thing, I might ask a question from the Right Brain Workout. Hopefully you guys have had a crack at that, which everyone hopefully listening at home is. I think it's interesting talking about pilgrimages and getting out with the walking. I thought this question was quite relevant to that because your new colleague is a bear. What do you suggest for lunch? And where are you even working? So you've gone on your pilgrimage, you're walking, there's a bear. Where are you working that you're going to end up having lunch with a bear? Ali, what was your thoughts on that?
So mine is that we are psychologists and we are trying out a new technique called Face Your Fears. So we're eating gummy bears and tiny teddies and caramello fluff because the bear has generally avoided that for obvious reasons.
That's brilliant. I love it. There's a whole new marketing campaign coming up, I'm sure. Darby, what have you got? What was your answer?
Got to talk it out. Oh, hi, Bear. We're working in my corporate office where I do my 9 to 5. Everyone here thinks I'm just a figment of their imagination, and I just don't feel seen. But you see me, Bear. I love you. Let's go to the office cafeteria and have some baby chinos together. That's it.
And Jono, your new colleague is a bear. Where do you suggest you go for lunch, and where are you working?
Oh, well, I have to admit that I actually have personal experience with this because I worked as a forester in northern Canada for almost 18 years. So I had lunch with bears almost every day. So I'm quite intimate with bears. And I have to tell you,
not too intimate. Not too intimate, I hope.
Not too intimate.
Not Leonardo DiCaprio style.
Because my little brother Gareth, he used to work with me in forestry, and we used to plant trees when these big forests have been taken down. You got to put trees back into them. So I remember I was the foreman on this crew, and Gareth was working on this hillside, and I had to come up and do a quality control check on the work that he was doing, which is something you never want to do with your brother. Anyway, he was working on the other side of this clump of trees, this really dense clump of trees. And so I went up there and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to scare the hell out of him. so I came up to this clump of trees and I started rustling the branches and I went, like this. And I could hear Gareth on the other side of the trees, all of a sudden you had these big bags around your waist where you put the little tree seedlings in. All of a sudden I heard he dropped his bags, and then he turned and he I don't know if I can swear on this show,
Go for it.
He just shouted, "Fuck you!" And he had a tree planting shovel, which is about 3 feet high, with a steel blade like an axe head on it. And the shovel came through the trees and missed my head by about a foot. And the next thing you know, Gareth was running down the hill as fast as he could to get away from the bear. And he ran all the way back to the truck that was at the bottom of this cut block. He got in there. And I felt so bad about it, about scaring the hell out of him, that I never actually told him that it was a bear. It was not a bear. It was me just trying to scare him. So I would like to have lunch with Gareth and be able to talk over the bear who scared the shit out of him back 25 years ago.
That's brilliant. I love it. I think on a note like that, I don't think we can top going from that. So I think that was such a brilliant thing. I was so inspired by what all of you guys have said, and all your writing is so beautiful. So on the show links, there's going to be details about how to get the books that these guys have done, get inspired by them, and have a read of them. And so, as I always finish end of every session, when in doubt, turn to your right side. Thanks for everyone for joining.
Okay.
That was brilliant.